Russia is pushing hard into the town of Chasiv Yar. Are they succeeding? But does Ukraine have their own surprise planned for Russia to the tune of 10 new brigades? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is sort of the latest frontline updates that we've seen. And over the last week, Russia has really quintupled down on their efforts to advance in and around Donetsk. But particularly, Russia's made a number of advances in the area of Chasiv Yar. Now, you guys might recall Chasiv Yar was a logistics and reserve hub during the Battle of Bakhmut, right? As Russian forces advanced to the outskirts of Bakhmut and then advanced through the center, Chasiv Yar remained kind of a stronghold for Ukrainian forces. And it makes sense that they would use it for that because it is tactically a very difficult town to take. You can see it has a lot of forested areas, a lot of water obstacles, and is stationed or situated in some pretty undulating terrain. So in some ways, it's very difficult to dislodge Ukrainian troops. But we're going to work back in time here, and you can kind of see the overall shifts in the front line. You can see that while Russia has been advancing very, very slowly in the area, they still have been making advances. You can see taking it all the way back to the start of the month. Here we are about a month ago, and you can see that Russian forces have been steadily creeping into position, particularly along the northern and southern flanks of Chasiv Yar, right? You can see here near Kalinivka, Russian forces beginning to advance, but now over the last several days, you've seen really some significant advances by Russian troops, particularly in this these districts in kind of the outskirts on the eastern half of the town. And one of the things we know is that Russia is very good at worming their way into an urban area or a forested area. And once they're in, they're very hard to dislodge and they're very hard to stop from making incremental advances. Russia's just willing to assume a lot of casualties to make minimal advances, because once they do, generally the Ukrainians aren't willing to expend the military manpower to conduct a substantive counterattack. And so Russian forces will advance, hold a position, and then 24 to 48 hours later, begin to advance once more. And that's what we're seeing, particularly here in Chasiv Yar. There's also been comparable advances. If you look to the south, Russia's been following a very similar action in this town of Shumy. You also have seen them, interestingly, pushing into this Yurivka. You could see over the last maybe the last week or so, Russian forces making what looks like kind of a breakthrough type salient here. Again, towards this town of New York. Not that New York, a different New York. But you can see Russian forces also advancing near Shumy. So this is all a sign, I think, while none of these are in and of themselves really like exceptional, noteworthy, or troubling gains, kind of in the aggregate, you could see that this Russian strategy of just piecemeal advances anywhere they can get away with it is a core part of Putin's strategy for winning. And once he sort of abandoned his idea of stunning breakthroughs or massive assaults and replaced it with simply a desire to lose troops but slice off little pieces of territory here and there, grabbing what he can, it actually aggregates into an effective strategy for seizing terrain. But Ukraine has their own surprise for him. But before we talk about that, you guys know that I don't get that many sponsors on the channel. I'm routinely demonetized. YouTube really is cracking down on combat creators that talk about this war. And it's understandable. It's an election year and YouTube has their own biases. But if you want to support what I do, and I depend on you guys to do it, the fans. So if you want to support what I do and you want access to the uncensored combat videos twice a week, I find the combat videos coming to us from the front line, oftentimes drone footage or GoPro footage. And we do a deep dive analysis about what it is, where it's taking place, and what it means for the tactical situation. It's the only place we can do this, and I do it on my own site, combatvetnews.com. The link is in the description. Become a member so you can get access to these twice weekly videos. One is dropping today. But if you really want to support the channel and you want to contribute at the lieutenant tier or even the colonel tier, those are going to get you access to a weekly Q&A video. The first one's actually dropping today. Plus, you get the shout outs, and the colonel tier members, we even shout you out by name. So again, check it out. Become a member, support what I do. If you appreciate the content, it means a ton. Plus, again, if you want to see those viral combat footage and get the deep dive analysis, that's the only place you can do it. So the link is in the description, combatvetnews.com. Okay, so Ukraine isn't taking this lying down, certainly, and this is part of the Ukrainian strategy, right? Ukraine has a twofold strategy to kind of build itself back up. One is addressing its manpower challenges and increasing its conscription, right? It's implemented a number of changes to its conscription law, lowering the age, improving Ukraine's ability to track military age males who might be eligible for conscription, and they are also forming them into several new brigades. But the holdup is not going to be manpower. It seems like it might actually be Western weapons, right? This Western security assistance is moving to the Ukrainian battlefield, but the scale and speed, the Ukrainians continue to say they would like to see more of it. And certainly the first place ammunition has to go isn't going to be to new brigades. It's to existing brigades currently in the fight, right? And according to an interview with Bloomberg, Zelenskyy said Ukrainian forces are way better in terms of manpower than they were a few months ago. And now that they have at least a promise of additional aid from the U.S., they are really looking positive into the future. But Ukraine's ability to conduct a counteroffensive depends on heavy equipment like mechanized fighting vehicles, APCs, tanks, and heavy artillery. This is referencing these 10 new Ukrainian brigades. You might remember the counteroffensive was 11 brigades, but NATO trained to a NATO standard. Now, the hope is that these 10 brigades, combined with a really more effective tactical worldview, a more refined tactics in terms of progress, is going to be able to contribute much more, right? A lot of those 11 counteroffensive brigades, frankly, were wasted using ineffective NATO tactics that produced a pretty high level of casualties. And again, just sort of exposed the fact that NATO tactics really only work with air superiority. And without that, they become very, very difficult. Right? As some commanders, even in Chasiv Yar, said that the forces in the area are more in need of ammunition than manpower, and that and Zelenskyy himself said that some of this equipment is taking too long to arrive at the front. Now, that's not entirely on the West, right? Because the West can only get it to Lviv. Beyond that, it falls on the Ukrainians, and that is a military task and a task that Russia is committed to interdicting. Russia wants to and is hitting Ukrainian ammunition depots, convoys in transit. They're doing everything they can to disrupt this equipment getting to the front. And of course, it's hard because when you have these supplies kind of being slow walked, they end up going to where they're needed most, which is in units actively equipped, actively in the fight. But it also needs to, at some point, go to these reserve brigades, right, who need to be stood up. And to do that, they have to have training ammunition. They also have the ammunition so that if they get thrown in the fight, they can fight. And this is a huge problem, again, because many of the Ukrainian brigades that are currently fighting are exhausted. And this sort of, as they point out, this months-long delay exacerbated it. And think of logistics, any logistics chain really, as being a little bit like traffic if you're driving on a highway, right? You're driving along, suddenly a car in front of you goes, oh, is that a deer? And they stop short. And then the car behind them stops short again. The car behind them stops short. And suddenly you've created a traffic jam, despite the fact that maybe that car that stopped, it wasn't a deer, it was a trash bag. They stopped for a moment and kept driving. There's no real obstacle. It's simply a wave effect caused by that initial disruption. Well, this is what you're seeing on kind of the logistics side, where you get this whiplashing effect, where these long delays and then sudden push of aid in creates an additional like gap, right? The logistics system works best when there's a steady, consistent flow that's been built up over time. And this will happen, just like, traffic jams don't last forever, but they last a lot longer than the initial issue. And this initial issue, right, was basically from February to nearly April. So, this is a real, this is going to take a long time to smooth out, right? And of course, as you guys know, Putin's counting on this, right? This is his big offensive that the Ukrainians are fighting now. Putin knows that by the time 10 new brigades are stood up, that the logistics aid gets smoothed out. It's going to be a very, very different war for him, and it's going to be much more difficult to make these kind of advances. So he's trying to really get in while the getting's good. Anyway, guys, that is all I had for you. A huge thank you to the Colonel tier members: Ardell Klein, No Spam, Dennis 1, Giles Marring, Nathan, Kirk Wagoneer, Tara Zymek, Miles Tomaranson, and Raul Vega, to name a few. And a huge thank you to all the Colonel tier members, guys. I appreciate you so much. And you guys are going to get access to the first Q&A video coming up here later today. But if you're not, you want to become a member at combatvetnews.com. Thanks, guys. See ya. Cheers.